はい、それでは黒川委員長よろしくお願いします。
Chairman Kurokawa, please. Now I'd like to start the 14th Commission meeting of the National Diet of Japan Fukushima Nuclear Accident Independent Investigation Committee, abbreviated as NAIIC. As we have informed you, we have questioning to witness who is currently a member of the House of Representatives and former Minister of Economy, Trade and Industry, Mr. Banri KAIEDA. Mr. KAIEDA was Minister of Economy, Trade and Industry from January 2011 to September 2011. And as you are aware, he was the METI minister at the time of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear accident. First, we'd like to thank you for joining us despite your busy schedule. As was introduced, I am Banri KAIEDA, member of the House of Representatives. I'd like to address Chairman Kurokawa and the members of the National Diet of Japan Fukushima Nuclear Accident Independent Investigation Commission. I would like to commend you on your work to elucidate what has happened at the time of the accident, and also thank you very much for all the work that you are undertaking to investigate the case so as to come up with proposals for future and for future prevention of a similar accident. I thank you very much indeed. As was mentioned, I myself at the time of the accident, March 11th, I was Minister of Economy, Trade and Industry. I myself have worked hard to try to contain the situation. More than a year has passed since then, but even today, it is May 17th today, but May 17th a year ago, I do remember what had happened on that exact date. Well, I myself believe I have made every effort that needed to be made, but there's still at the same time things that I need to reflect upon. And as for the details, I will try to clarify them as I respond to the questions that you'll be raising. And so in this process, I would like to reflect upon what I could have done better. And I will do my very best to recall what had happened back then, and also I have taken some notes in the process, so in order for me to ensure accuracy, I may be referring to some of my notes. But if I have any misunderstanding of what has happened, please do understand that that could be the case. Thank you very much. Well, time is limited, and therefore, well, there are a number of reports that have been written. And as minister, I understand that you have played a very significant role. So I'd like to be very focused in asking questions and try to ask as many questions as possible. Yesterday, as you may know, your direct subordinate back then, Mr. Matsunaga, the former Vice Minister of the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, has joined us, and he has talked a great deal yesterday. But when it comes to the Article 15, the declaration of emergency, and also this halting of Hamaoka stress test, and the planned blackouts, and amongst others, and the 2006 back check, he was not very, he did not remember specifically, and and he was not, did not recall what sort of judgment was made, what information he received from, for example, NISA, and also the other agencies. So I'm sure that we'll be asking questions about this. Hamaoka power station was halted a year ago, and I'm sure that you were involved with this as minister. And also there's a stress test, and also planned outage, and also the ministerial statement as to the restart of the nuclear power plants on dated June 18th of last year. So these are some of the issues I would like to take up today. So can we begin with Mr. Sakurai? My name is Sakurai, one of the members of this commission. And before I ask a question, I'd like to take this opportunity to say that I'm very thankful to the statement and the former minister has mentioned, and I believe that you stated this last year on August 25th. But I myself back then had. You were saying that you wanted to disclose everything that you've seen, heard, and you said that you were hoping that the day would come when you can disclose all the details of what you've experienced. Having reflected on your statement and your feelings back then, allow me to begin my questions. Now, first, as METI minister, as I refer to you, as METI minister, you were responsible for nuclear administration, especially NISA. You had the authority and responsibility towards NISA, but can you describe in detail what you believe was your responsibility towards NISA? I'd like to respond to Mr. Sakurai. Well, yes, the NISA, the Nuclear and Industrial Safety Agency. Well, this is a regulatory institution. It's an agency. It is an agency which is responsible for nuclear administration and regulation. So it's a very important administration. It is a regulatory agency, and therefore, as such, well, be it law or regulatory standards, they were in a position to determine these laws and standards. And at the same time, I have been saying this a number of times at Diet, but I have been making these statements from early on after the accident. But I believe that it is not desirable that NISA is affiliated to METI. On the one hand, we have this agency which is responsible for promoting nuclear energy. And at the same time, there is NISA, which is in a position to regulate nuclear operators. And therefore, I have been saying from an early stage that the two should be separated. Next. Now, in normal times, I'm just focusing on NISA, but in normal times, and also in times of emergency, what is your understanding of the roles to be played by NISA? What was your understanding as minister at the time of the accident? Well, in normal times, as I've been saying, is their responsibility to see that the safety standards are being abided by. And so in various operations, it was their responsibility to check to see that the safety standards were being abided. But in case of emergency, well, for example, there are a number of things that need to be taken in case of an emergency, and I'm sure that this might come up later on, but for example, releasing to the sea the low radioactive water, contaminated water. And the TEPCO gave us information as to the procedures that we wanted to take in releasing the contaminated water. And well, there was this request to check, and NISA was in a position to check this, and they gave instructions as to what points needed to be looked into in carrying out the operation. So NISA was in a position to check such details. For example, it was just the releasing of contaminated water into the sea, but for all the operations, and for example, injecting nitrogen, etc. In taking these steps, it was NISA's responsibility to ensure that advice be given so as to try to enhance the safety as much as possible. And in response, the operators in carrying out those operations will try to take this into consideration. I asked about the role of NISA, but what about the role or responsibility of the Minister of Economy, Trade and Industry in such an event? Well, First, once from NISA, I received information that TEPCO is requesting to take such and such steps, and NISA says that they wish to check certain details. Once I receive such a report as minister and as a politician and as Minister of Economy, Trade and Industry, I would try to look into whether or not there are anything missing and give advice wherever I saw necessary to try to ensure that the work be properly done. So there were a number of incidents in which I did make such requests. Well, your response is something that you've stated at this point in time when time has lapsed since March 11th. But I'm asking about the authority responsible, the minister at the time of the accident, not after a certain period of time has passed. Well, it will be Article 15. And there was the emergency nuclear accident emergency headquarters that was established. And, well, when there was no headquarters, it was the responsibility of the Minister of Economy, Trade and Industry to carry out the types of things that I've just described. But once, this nuclear accident was something that had a major impact on a large number of people in Japan. And because we understood that to be the case, the Prime Minister headed this nuclear emergency response headquarters. And I was a deputy chief of this nuclear emergency response headquarters. And so as a deputy chief, after the accident occurred, I was in a position to assist the Prime Minister, who was a chief of the nuclear emergency response headquarters.
Well, as Minister of METI, I'm sure that you oversee a variety of activities. In the activities that you oversee, when you think about nuclear accidents, there is a huge effect that is felt by the people and the society overall. I'm sure that we don't have very much time to discuss all this, but in the event that there is a nuclear accident, in your capacity as minister, have you received an explanation as to how you ought to take action should such an accident occur? As I had mentioned, when we think about the countermeasures headquarters that was set up, I was the vice head of that headquarters, so I conducted my activities as part of that and received explanations and briefings as necessary. As I had mentioned earlier, I had mentioned how NISA needs to do an investigation and put together reports, and those reports would come to me, and I would hear what they have to say, and if there's anything else that needs to be added, that would be done. At the same time, I am minister of the ministry. I am also vice head of that countermeasures headquarters. So there is the special emergency response law. There is also the law that regulates the nuclear power plants, the Nuclear Regulation Act. So this also was being done at the same time. Well, I'm going to be asking you about some details here. Within NISA, there is the ERC, the Emergency Response Center. Have you, as minister, gone to that center? Yes, I have seen it. And the ERSS and SPEEDY, these are systems that are utilized where you have images that you can see. And were you able to receive a briefing on this? When I went to this center, it was after the accident had occurred. So I do believe that I had heard about SPEEDY, but it was after that. And so what sort of system it was something I heard right then and there. Before the accident occurred, you conducted your various activities as minister, but you had not seen this at that point in time. That's exactly correct. Now I'd like to change my focus with regard to the Article 15 notice that was put out, the notification. What sort of response did you take as minister? As far as this is concerned, when the earthquake happened, I was in the settlement and administrative control commission at that time. So I went immediately to my own office and changed into suitable emergency attire, and there was a headquarters meeting for the emergency response. I went to that meeting, and then I went back to my ministry, and the first time as METI, we had our accident-related meeting, and all the concerned parties attended this meeting. In that meeting, with regard to this Article 15, this was confirmed, but there was no report that was given regarding this situation. And after the meeting, this was on the second floor, the meeting room. There needed to be some separate meetings, and I was still there. And the head of NAIIC had said that this was a situation that had to do with Article 15. So therefore, as was mentioned earlier, the head of this headquarters was the Prime Minister, and so we needed to come up with this nuclear emergency response headquarters. And as for the Prime Minister's vehicle, it would be the secretary as well as the security personnel that would be riding with the Prime Minister. And the NAIIC representative was also there, and it was very tight quarters in the back, but we went immediately to the Prime Minister's office, and the deputy director of NAIIC also came with me in my vehicle. And as far as the head of NAIIC was already at the Prime Minister's residence at that time, right after the accident, so I went with the assistant director and my secretary and the manager in charge, the deputy, and we gave an explanation about the situation. When you went to the Prime Minister's residence, it was for the purposes of putting out this emergency proclamation. And then after the Prime Minister's residence, you arrived there. What sort of explanation, if you could be so brief, did you give to the Prime Minister? This is a situation that has to do with Article 15, so I said we needed to set up a headquarters for the purposes of this. May I please explain what had happened, the process? And then the Prime Minister had said, as far as the reactor situation, what was it like? This was asked. The head of NAIIC, as well as the deputy head of NAIIC, gave an explanation. However, it seemed as if there was quite a lot of exchange of opinions regarding that. And I said what is most important is to come up with that headquarters. Well, what is that based upon, I was asked. Of course, I do believe that it was the deputy to the head of the section. I do believe that there are laws and other kinds of ordinances and such that we needed to look at. And so, therefore, it was just the number that I had mentioned. The chief cabinet secretary was there as well, and the deputy was there as well of the chief cabinet secretary, and we decided to conduct this activity, and we also had the leaders of the different political parties there as well, talking about these matters and coming up with our plans. As far as the Prime Minister himself was concerned, to come up with that emergency proclamation, did he have any opinion about that? What he first said is this is something that we have to deal with right away. This is on the magnitude of Chernobyl. This was said 2 or 3 times from the Prime Minister. To come up with such an emergency proclamation, did he say anything about that? He did not say that it didn't need to be issued, and nor did he really touch upon that. But I did feel that this needed to be done, of course. I do apologize for asking about the conclusion, but looking at it objectively, when we think about that emergency proclamation, it was issued 1900 hours and 03 minutes. And during that time, it seemed as if the situation was getting more severe at the reactor, there needed to be action taken sooner, perhaps, and the headquarters needed to be able to move in a more swift manner. Could you not have done that? Yes, it's exactly as you say. So therefore, as far as I'm concerned, the headquarters was still not established, but after it was established, I sent the deputy minister of METI and decided to have him visit the site to see what was going on before the headquarters was set up. Please prepare for this trip, I said, and go from METI. To go by air. Well, why was it that it took so much time? Well, it took some time to receive the understanding of the Prime Minister. Next, regarding evacuation instructions, I'd like to ask a few points. As you are well aware, before the government issues such instructions, Fukushima Prefecture said within 2 kilometers of the plant they needed to evacuate. Before the 3 kilometers was decided by the government, Minister, did you know that the prefecture issued this direction? No, I did not know about that. That is, you did not receive a report. That's exactly correct. And then after that, 3 kilometers and 10 kilometers, there were those instructions given to evacuate. This was based upon whose decision? The headquarters was set up and the emergency situation was announced. So at that point, based on my understanding, there was a manual that had existed. So within a 3-kilometer radius, people needed to evacuate, and I did understand it as such. However, regarding that, Mr. Watanabe, or the head of NISA, these were the gentlemen who gave their opinions, and they had said that 3 kilometers is a conservative radius and that it would be adequate. So therefore, I understood it as such.
Be it the emergency declaration and also the evacuation, there is a nearby emergency center. Did the information go to the local emergency center? Well, the emergency center, I think, understood the situation, especially the people who were communicating. It was Mr. Ito, who is the official in charge of emergency management. And at that time, I was at the emergency management center. There was this second floor room where I was staying, and Mr. Ito came, and I talked with him, and so I believe that he was familiar with this. Well, this was before the 3-kilometer evacuation was decided or after? I do not recall accurately, but it was already night, and well, in those days, the sun sets at quite an early hour, and therefore, I believe that the local police and also self-defense force and fire department personnel, and also the municipal government officials needed to cooperate, and therefore, I think Mr. Ito, the official in charge of emergency management, worked hard. Next, about the evacuation instructions, I'd like to ask questions related to that. Well, next is the order to evacuate in the 10-kilometer radius. Whose proposal, whose explanation was this judgment based upon? Well, this 10-kilometer, well, at that time, I believe that it was the next day in the morning, and I think it was a time when I was giving instructions about the vent, and therefore I heard that even at the 3 kilometers radius, well, the vent was a wet vent, the suppression chamber, and passing through water there, and well, there's both wet and dry, but through the suppression chamber it's released, and therefore it's not the case that there will not be any radioactive substances released into the atmosphere, but it can be minimized, and therefore we thought that 3 kilometers would be sufficient, but to be on the safe side, we said it it should be 10 kilometers. I think it was the Director General of NISA or Dr. Watanabe who said so. And likewise, about the 20-kilometer evacuation instruction, through what procedures did you make this decision? Well, up until this 10-kilometer and to the time of deciding 20-kilometer and beyond, I think the situation was slightly different because up until that point in time, well, including myself, as I said, Mr. Ito, who I explained, and also Dr. Madarame, and also the Director General of NISA. All these people were the people who I'm talking with. But at the time when the instruction for 20 kilometers was made, I think it was the Prime Minister's office. Yes, as I said, I was on the second floor, and also after 15th, I was right next to the Prime Minister's room. But at the same time, in the Prime Minister's official residence, there is a room for the Prime Minister and also the Chief Cabinet Secretary, and also the Secretary and the Deputy Chief Secretary and the Cabinet Chief Secretary. So there are a number of people who are constantly at the official Prime Minister's official residence and keeping in contact with one another. And I think it was from that discussion that this decision was made, as I recall. Well, I'm showing you a slide on the screen, and so there is the Prime Minister's official residence and the B2 room. You cannot see? I'm sorry. And could you repeat your question once again, please? Yes, what Mr. KAIEDA, what you've just said is that, first is the Nuclear Emergency Response Headquarters, and aside from that, there is the Prime Minister's official residence, and also you talked about the second floor of the Prime Minister's official residence, and also there's the B2 emergency team. I think there are 3 locations where various people were assembled. Is this correct? I believe that is correct, yes. Now, about this 20-kilometer evacuation. Now, at the same time, wasn't there discussion on an evacuation in the 30-kilometer radius? Well, I don't remember that. Well, there were some news reports saying that there will be instructions to evacuate within the 30-kilometer radius. But did you not discuss this? Do you not recall? Well, time-wise, I believe it was 18 o'clock on the 12th that this instruction for the 20-kilometer was given, and the vent and the seawater, and those were the things that I was concentrating on. So I do not recall the details of what you're saying. And as for the designation of the evacuation zone, was it the case? Did you consider how to communicate this to the local governments and the residents? Well, as I earlier stated, there is the local headquarters, which was playing an important role. I was believing that the local disaster response officers would be playing an important role, and therefore Senior Vice Minister Ikeda was heading the local disaster the local nuclear emergency response headquarters. At the time of 3 kilometers instruction, Mr. Ikeda had not arrived at the site. At the time of the 10-kilometer, yes, I did get in contact with the Senior Vice Minister Ikeda. Next, the Prime Minister went to Fukushima. And at that time, Minister, you, as METI Minister, did you request to go with him at the same time? No. As I earlier stated, we were the emergency response center on the second floor, and we were not familiar what had been discussed on the 5th floor. But According to what we heard, Dr. Madarame was to accompany the Prime Minister, and Dr. Madarame was working with us most of the time to try to contain the situation, and therefore Dr. Madarame was going to accompany the Prime Minister. So after daybreak, I was informed that he would go. So that is how I came to know about this. Now, what was the explanation given to you as to the reason why the Prime Minister would go to Fukushima? Did you confirm this at that time? No, I do not know. As Minister, you were informed after the decision was made for the Prime Minister to go? Yes, that is correct. Well, next I'd like to move on to questions about the vent. Well, TEPCO. What sort of explanation did they give you as to the condition of the reactor and also the need for vent? Well, the explanation was that the water was not going in, and therefore the reactor core temperature was rising, and the pressure was building up. And the increase in pressure meant that the riskiest thing that could happen was the explosion of the containment vessel, and therefore Dr. Madarame and myself, and also there was a fellow from TEPCO who was also there, and I asked them how long the containment vessel will be able to hold out the situation, and they gave me answers saying how many hours, and so in order to avoid the reactor explosion, the core explosion, there was a need to release the hydrogen, and therefore they were saying that venting was necessary, and this sounded reasonable. And in order to cool the reactor with water, you need the pressure to go down for water to get inside. And given that situation, well, this was the very first time that we were to experience this, and even if it were to wet vent, and we said that the radioactive substances would be released into the atmosphere. And so it was a difficult choice to make. And yet, TEPCO said that they would go ahead with the vent, and so I said that I wanted them to do so. Well, earlier, you talked about your authority on Article 64 under the Nuclear Regulation Act to implement this. You were in position to give that order. But it sounds as if TEPCO was making this request to do so, and as Minister, you gave it a consent. But why is it that you gave an order under the Act?
Well, one of the reasons was because I had said to do that about 3 a.m. on the 12th. I went back to METI and had a press conference, and TEPCO had told us to do so, so we will be doing that. As far as the safety is concerned, we want to make sure we assure this, and we want to make sure that we keep the amount of radiation that will be released at the lowest level possible. That was 3 a.m. And I had a feeling that this would begin right away. And I said TEPCO will be handling this, but it was not being done. So it wasn't being done at all. And at that time, what I was thinking was that as far as TEPCO is concerned, this is something I thought then. Even if this sort of situation had arisen, in order to keep the accident as small in scope as possible, perhaps they were hesitating. But in actuality, it wasn't that. There were exchanges with the on-site people, and I telephoned them once and found out that as far as this is concerned, the radiation dosage would become higher as time goes on. So therefore, there might be instances where Tokyo Electric Power Company, rather than carrying that out, the government of Japan ought to be able to give the directions necessary through the Nuclear Regulation Act. And that the country will be backing up TEPCO and would take the responsibilities necessary. And why wasn't this being done? That's something that I had really wondered about, if something could not be done right away, and that was what had happened. According to your explanation, the venting would not be more swift because the directions would be given under the Act, but that you decided to endorse TEPCO's actions. There were two meanings to this matter, and it wasn't just one concern. And when the venting was to be done, whether it be a wet vent, there would also be the release of radiological materials, coordination with the people of the area and the municipalities and the local governments. How did you do this? Regarding venting, we didn't know about Speedy then, so we worried about the direction of the wind. And at night, from the land to the sea is the direction that the wind would go. And that was the broad-scoped report that we had received. And another thing is that we had to consider the evacuation of the residents of the area, especially because it was nighttime. Whether or not this was being done in a very thorough manner, Mr. Ito was the one who was responsible for collecting the information and relaying it to us. And Mr. Ikeda arrived on site in the middle of the night. He was not able to go by helicopter, so he went by land. So I was not able to contact him when he was within 3 kilometers. But he had a discussion with the local headquarters head, and I asked him to make his confirmations with him. I'll be going back. As far as Unit 1's vent was concerned, we're talking about that. But as far as Unit 2 and 3 are concerned, when we think about the venting and the injection of seawater, perhaps this was also discussed. When I did the press conference, I talked about Units 1 and 2. And as far as Unit 2 was concerned, water had gone in, I had heard. But the report I had received quite after the fact. So therefore, when I was thinking about the vent, I was thinking about Units 1 and 2. And finally, I heard that Unit 2 had some water come in, so I said, please do it vis-a-vis Unit 1 as well. So I was thinking about Units 1 and 2 specifically. What about Unit 3? Unit 3 was later on. This too needed to have the venting activity done. There was that necessity. Next, I'd like to talk about seawater injection. From TEPCO, there was a request to have the injection of seawater take place. You've heard this from them as minister, and the government heard about this. What did you think? Yes, and in fact, we are in charge of nuclear energy, so to release the pressure, venting for that purpose, and to cool the water was very important. So therefore, I wanted to see the cooling being done with water injection. And it was about 3 o'clock on the 12th. Fresh water, 80 tons of it, was injected, and this was finalized. We had received a report. So that means that this activity was completed. So after that, seawater, whatever other water might exist, we wanted to have that injected so that cooling could be done. And I think that was around 3 o'clock. After freshwater injection took place, right after that, I said, please do inject seawater right away. And that's something that I had requested. Minister, at that time, it was Article 64, Clause 3 under that you decided to come up with this measure and put out this order. And you also put together documents regarding that. It was 17 hours, 55 minutes that this was done. There were 2 reasons. If you put salt in the reactor, then you would have to decommission that reactor, and perhaps there was a hesitation in doing so. So I thought it had to be an order under this Article 64. And thereafter, shortly thereafter, at the Prime Minister's residence, the seawater injection became a topic of discussion. Minister, you had already given the guidance, and why was it that it might have been a misunderstanding, but why was it that it became a point of discussion at the Prime Minister's residence? Well, I thought that I could make my own decision and give the orders. I was there at 17:55, and I gave these directions. And I said to NISA to create the necessary documentation. And this was the work of the headquarters that had to deal with such nuclear power plant accidents. So vis-a-vis Prime Minister Khan, who was the head of this headquarters, I did give him a report that this was the order that was given. And as far as this was concerned, what did Prime Minister Khan say? Would there not be an issue of criticality being reached? And what sort of response did the other people say with regard to the criticality situation that might occur? To change it from freshwater to seawater, I didn't think that criticality would be reached. But I am a lay person, so therefore Mr. Watanabe, who was there, and NISA's people, and Mr. Takekuro was also someone that had an awareness about this as well, I believe. And as a result of that, as far as seawater injection was concerned, what sort of discussions did you have with TEPCO? I put out the orders, so I was not going to retract those orders. So a report was given, and then I would seek the understanding. I did not have the awareness that it had already begun. As far as those discussions being done, I thought that it would be something that would be appropriate to conduct those discussions. I think it was 1900 hours and 6 minutes from TEPCO to NISA. There was a contact saying that seawater injection had started. Was that something that had reached you as well? I think it was 1900 hours and 04 minutes, but I'm not sure whether or not it came at that specific time. Was it 4 minutes or 6 minutes that you received this report that the seawater injection was taking place? Whether it took place at 6 minutes after or not, I'm not sure. But this was something that was discussed with the Prime Minister, and at that time, I was there with the Prime Minister and had not received a report, I don't think, from anyone that it was done.
And well, what happened after that, I think this has been reported through the media, but the head office of TEPCO said that they would have given orders to stop the seawater injection at Fukushima. And the head of Fukushima Daiichi, Mr. Yoshida, continued the injection, but it was reported that it had been suspended, or it was later explained that this injection was on a trial basis. Now, at present, looking back, as minister, what is your impression of what has happened then? Well, I believe that it was the judgment made at the site was correct. Well, then, why is it that the head office of TEPCO and also the people at the Prime Minister's official residence at that time, why is it that they gave instructions to cancel the injection? I do not know. Well, I believe that there are several. Well, if I say I don't know, that would be the end. But at the Diet, this was also taken up, and the then Vice President was summoned as a witness at the Diet, and I was listening to his testimony. And so what TEPCO was saying, the reason that TEPCO gave was that the then Vice President gave the explanation which I thought was convincing. And as a result, I think it was good that they did not suspend the injection. But as minister, the fact that TEPCO gave such an instruction to stop the injection. Well, as the Prime Minister's office or the minister as an assistant to the chief of the emergency response headquarters, what are your thoughts about what TEPCO head office did? Well, Mr. Takeguro, the fellow from TEPCO, well, I believe that Mr. Takeguro has also been summoned here as witness at NAIIC. I observed his hearing, and he left the Prime Minister's office. He went to the TEPCO head office and also contacted local people at Fukushima, I understand. So his explanation was what I understood to be the case at TEPCO. So the intention of the Prime Minister's office, well, whether or not that was the true intention, the fact what the government says has a big impact. And as Mr. Takeguro is saying, the weight of the chief Prime Minister is very heavy. How do you take this? Well, yes, the Prime Minister is the top authority, and also in case of an emergency, it is only natural that the Prime Minister is given a large amount of authority, and in that respect, I think that it is a very heavy responsibility that the Prime Minister holds, and the Prime Minister, I believe, has taken this seriously, and I've witnessed this and again during that process. Well, as minister, at that time, well, did you give an explanation saying that you were assuming that the injection had already started? Well, yes. I did report to the Prime Minister that I issued an order under the Nuclear Regulation Act to inject seawater. And, well, before that, there was the hydrogen explosion. And unfortunately, no one at that time had predicted that hydrogen explosion could occur. And so switching from fresh water to seawater, and there was no explanation about the possibility of criticality. But I was thinking maybe there could be such a possibility. But I had given the orders. And so... Well, I'd already given the orders, and the injection has not started yet. If it had started and the injection had been suspended and stopped, then it would have been a different story, I think. I'm sorry to repeat the same thing, but looking at the materials that I see, it seems that the injection did start at 1904, but this was not reported to NISA, nor was it reported to Minister. And it was 1955 that the Prime Minister gave the order to inject seawater. Well, I think that precious time was lost, and there was this vacuum in which communication failed. Well, I think that we and also the people at the basement floor, B2 floor, even when I was at the Prime Minister's office, at the second floor, yes, we did experience this difficulty in communicating and sharing information, and this was a negative. On the one hand, we were trying to contain the accident, but I was also feeling that there was this problem of miscommunication. We had to try to get in contact with TEPCO head office, and Mr. Takeguro was the person responsible for giving technical advice and carrying out this liaison and communication. And there were two others from TEPCO who was also responsible for the liaison. And also there were people who were working at Fukushima and Daiichi. So I think it was a relay game where the messages were transmitted through a number of steps, and the message was not coming straight across. Well, it could have been that that was the case, but under the minister, METI, there is the NISA, and the fact that NISA was in such a situation, I think that as minister, you should give it instructions to try to improve the situation. Now, what do you think about what happened back then, in hindsight? Well, at 1902. The seawater injection began. But this was something that I came to know of quite later on. And at that point in time, I was not in a position to criticize NISA or instruct NISA. But the Director General of NISA, as I said, well, first was at the Prime Minister's office, but later he returned to METI. And because of that, I think that there was a difficulty in carrying out the communication. I think that we should have done something to make the communication smoother. Well, talking about this communication, I have two questions. One, in Okama town, there was a local off-site center, as we call it. But in Fukushima, it was said that it was going to be transferred to Fukushima. And were you consulted beforehand as minister? Well, about the off-site center. Well, the original off-site center, well, it was experiencing a blackout, and so it could not be used. And therefore, they were using the nuclear power center that was adjacent to that. I think you're talking about that center. So in that case, I think it's not the off-site center that you're talking about. But when you talk about the transfer to Fukushima, well, that's on the 13th. I did give instructions for the people, some of the people to move, but there was the vent, and there was a need to confirm the evacuation. And so I said that some people could go to Fukushima, but there were others who needed to remain to ensure that the evacuation has been completed. Now, at the end, based on whose advice did you make your final judgment? Yes, in the end, I made the final judgment. And so at that time, was there someone who came to you to give an explanation? For example, Mr. Matsunaga, Vice Minister. Well, I was contacting with the Senior Vice Minister KAIEDA, who was at the local site. And I was given information as to how the evacuation was progressing. And, well, especially about the hospitals, I was concerned about the people who were hospitalized. And I said that the off-site center transfer to Fukushima should be the very last step. Now, there is the Safety Inspection Office. And the people there also moved to Fukushima City. Again, as minister, were you consulted beforehand? And did you give the instruction? Well, that was something I was informed of later, after it happened. I said that that was a problem. And, there are 11 such offices, and I asked all the heads of these 11 inspection offices, and I told all the inspectors to go to Fukushima in turns. These NISA inspectors who were to go to this site, and I wanted them to see what was happening there. I think that all the inspectors went there, and I did get a report about that. But at one point in time, it was very unfortunate that there were these inspectors missing from the Fukushima Daiichi site at one point in time.
With regard to TEPCO and the withdrawal of TEPCO, there was this issue of withdrawal. As minister, when did you first hear about this? And from whom? President Shimizu had called me. As far as this is concerned, I'm not able to really recollect. I've also asked the secretary to think about this. I'm not sure, neither is my secretary, whether it was once or twice. Once is for certain. In the chief cabinet secretary's office, I received a call, and the secretary had answered that, and the secretary said, "You have a call from President Shimizu." And so therefore, I went outside and I took the call from the president. And what I recall very clearly are 3 points. From Fukushima Daiichi to Fukushima Daini, there was not this word of withdrawal, but rather retreat that was used. And to have some people remain was not something that was actually discussed, I don't recall. I'd like to ask in another way, was there an explanation that all people would be withdrawn? I don't remember that all people would have been withdrawn from that area. But that is how I understood it, as far as I recollect. So the NISA person who was there at that time, even though he was not with NISA, I said, if there is an outage, what will happen? It would go to the 5th and 6th, the effect, and that there would be an explosion that would happen. And that's how I recall it. The TEPCO management people weren't there then. Mr. Takeguro was there, I believe, nearby. Also, however, as far as decisions, when various discussions were conducted, let's go to TEPCO and let's create this integrated headquarters. This was just something that was conducted by those persons who were in charge of the administrative, political matters. So therefore, the chief cabinet secretary, when we were having a discussion with them, the secretary was outside. So I don't think at that time he was there. The Tokyo Electric Power Company, if top-level people were there nearby, then you can directly confirm with them, could you not? As far as that is concerned, it's that they were there with us constantly, so how shall I put this? The communication with TEPCO did not go so very well. Sometimes there were instances where people need to run to TEPCO to talk to them. The president had called, so I thought that was the president's decision to call when that had happened. And it was Minister KAIEDA, yourself, that answered that phone call. Was there anyone else who was on that phone call besides yourself and Mr. Shimizu, the president of TEPCO? I received that phone call, and what I had heard later was that Mr. Edano had also received a phone call. It's not that he was there at that time in the same place, and nor was I there, so it was not that I had heard the conversation going on, but I had heard that there was a phone call that was made to Mr. Edano as well, the chief cabinet secretary at that time. What sort of conclusion did the leadership that was assembled there at the Prime Minister's residence arrive at? Well, if that should happen, that would be a horrendous thing. East Japan would be lost. We feel very badly for the people who need to work on site, but we would like them to hang in there and to continue their efforts. We agreed upon that. What sort of response was decided upon then? Let's have President Shimizu of TEPCO come, we said. And we were not able to share information in the manner that we had liked to, and we were not able to relay to one another our desires and our requests. So let's go to TEPCO and create a headquarters there, we decided. As far as President Shimizu is concerned, he did say that the personnel would not be withdrawn from there. How did you feel when you heard that? When I heard that, I felt a little bit of energy go out of me. That is because this is a very serious decision that the president had arrived at. And for those who would be remaining on site, they would have an acute radiation exposure. So I wondered what this would mean. This is different from what I had heard over the phone, so I was a little bit surprised, to tell you the truth. As you are well aware through the reports and through the hearings here, TEPCO people from Daiichi, that they would completely withdraw. They've never said that. You've given that explanation. What do you think about that? That they would not be withdrawing. Mr. Shimizu had made that call, and the significance of that call, when I think about that, I think that it was a very important conclusion that was arrived at on their part. To have the essential personnel remain on site. I'm sure everyone is necessary, but to have a certain number remain and to have the others for a temporary period of time evacuate, that's something I'm sure they discussed. Mr. Yoshida, of course, decided that as well. For such a phone call to come, I'm sure that it was a very heavy-hearted decision that needed to be made. Mr. Shimizu also called once. From Nagoya, he was not able to return, so he was making a request to use the self-defense forces aircraft to come back. I said that the self-defense forces aircraft need to be used for saving lives. I said that was not possible. And the second time the phone call came, it might have been the third time as well. It might have been then. To Mr. Yoshida, someone had confirmed with him what sort of desires he espoused. I did not do that myself. Did you hear from someone? That is, the chief on site, Mr. Yoshida, was saying such and such. At that time, I had not heard of anything. Thank you very much.
Next, Mr. Nomura, please. My name is Nomura. I'd like to ask you some questions. Mr. Sakurai has already asked some questions which I would like to follow up on. And so please excuse me. But about the venting. Well, the fact that the venting was delayed and the fact that you judged that there was this delay. And also you needed people who were willing to sacrifice themselves to do the work. And in order to endorse such movement, you said that you decided to issue an order based on the Nuclear Regulation Act. Now, the fact that the government issues an order based on the Nuclear Regulatory Act, in this order, if in the event a civilian were to die, do you have the authority to give such an order to carry out the work, even if you're going to risk the civilians' lives? Well, I wonder how I should say this, but this was a very heavy, difficult choice to make, and at that point in time, I thought the government needed to support TEPCO in some way or another. So it's not the case where we were saying that people could die. We understand that, but still, does the Act include such an authority? Is the government given such an authority? No, not under the Nuclear Regulatory Act, no. But what I could do was based on the Act, to issue an order. That was what I was capable of doing. Well, about the evacuation then. Supposing that if everyone at the Fukushima Daiichi wanted to retreat and leave Fukushima, does the government have a capability to order them to stay? No. The government cannot order, but instead request them to stay on and do their best. I think that is the type of expression I've been using. Well, on that point, tomorrow, on the 15th, on the next day, you went to TEPCO. And Prime Minister Khan, was he making a request in such a way? Was he requesting? Well, you have to ask Prime Minister Khan about that. But I was making a request. No, you accompanied him. And, TEPCO is saying that Prime Minister Khan came and in a very loud voice scolded the people at TEPCO. And we hear witnesses saying that they feel very uneasy about this. What are your thoughts about that? Well, when people hear Mr. Khan speak for the very first time, yes, it could be that they felt such an uneasiness. But you would think that there are other expressions to be used. But I know him quite well, and so I know what his true intention is. Well, you were then minister. Now, listening to these words, which could be interpreted to be scolding, you saying that this was a request made by the Prime Minister, even though the words were very strong. Well, as I said, President Shimizu was saying that with just a few exceptions, other people should be leaving Fukushima Daiichi. So I think that was good, but I thought that it was very hard for the people who would be staying on. Now, you're saying that Prime Minister made a request, but the fact that the government does not have such an authority to give orders is something that you lectured to the Prime Minister? No, I did not give such a lecture. Another question. Well, you earlier talked about seawater injection, and it seems that TEPCO was reluctant to inject seawater into the reactor, you said. Now, why is it that you thought that they were reluctant? Well, one reason is because, at that point in time, I think it was already like that. But at the number 1, 2, 3, 4 reactors, we knew that they had to be decommissioned. But at the same time, we were thinking from an early stage that number 5 and 6 also would have to be scrapped. But TEPCO was reluctant to make such a statement, and therefore. Well, through Mr. Takeguro, I felt that was the case. Talking to Mr. Takeguro, so I was thinking that they were reluctant to do so. And therefore you gave the order, you said. But, the way they responded to this accident, looking at how TEPCO dealt with the situation, do you think that it's desirable that the government give orders, and that is the reason why you issued these orders? Well, it was the same with the venting case, but first the operator needs to say what they wish to do. And if there is a major discrepancy in the thinking of the government could, from the initial stage, give instructions or orders. But in case of the venting and the seawater injection, TEPCO first came to us saying that they wanted to do so, and therefore we said that they should try to do it on their own. But if they're not capable of doing it on their own, it could be that the government would be giving instructions or orders. At that time, we saw the people working there, staking their lives to try to save the Japanese people, to try to contain the accident. And we've been hearing the testimonies of these people. And we hear these people say that though they were struggling and working extremely hard, they wondered why they had to listen to these and take up these calls from the Prime Minister's office. How would you respond to that? Well, I believe that between the Prime Minister's office and TEPCO head office and the nuclear power station site, the sharing of information was very much insufficient. And it should be that at the Crisis Management Center,
we should be looking at the screen, and well, there should be a connection with the TEPCO head office and be able to monitor what is happening there. But there was the earthquake and tsunami. People had their hands full trying to deal with this situation, and we were not able to use the equipment that we normally would have been able to use for communication. And so I think that this is the reason why we're not able to receive information as to the hard work that was taking place at Fukushima. Well, as Mr. Sakurai asked, Prime Minister immediately after the accident went to the site, and the people who accompanied him also tried to establish a communication line. And there has been a number of occasions in which the Prime Minister's office tried to get in contact with Fukushima, but rather than trying to collect information, it seems to be that the Prime Minister's office was instead giving instructions instead of gathering information. Based on what law was the Prime Minister's office doing this? I do not know. Well, I did make a phone call once. That was the time of the venting at an early stage of the accident. But as Mr. Nomura says, well, and as it's been said earlier, well, I am the deputy chief, but also the chief of the emergency and the nuclear emergency response headquarters. The Prime Minister has heavy responsibility, and therefore I think that we should be very careful in using this authority. Looking back, listening to what the people are saying, the plane was like on the verge of crashing, and yet the pilot knows that he may die, and yet he's struggling to improve the situation. And yet, it's like asking them why the plane is about to crash. And the nuance of the people at the nuclear power station site is like they had this uneasiness having to respond to such basic questions in a time of emergency. Well, as minister, yes, this is something that I need to reflect upon, having seen those things happening. Yes, and I believe that, well, in Japan, we use the term second wrongly. And I don't want to go into the details here, but I thought it was a person called Seo. And there was this another person by Shun, and this person is saying something correct. That person is given a death toll, a death sentence. And at the end, the pole broke, and so I think that this is something that I also had to reflect upon. I should have put a stop to this movement. But looking at the Tohoku headquarters, and at that time, you were at the TEPCO head office, but you as minister, about the division of roles between the head office and Fukushima, what was your thinking about that?
Well, first of all, we thought that it needed to be a certain way, and we have exchanges in real time. And Mr. Yoshida also will say things very clearly, and TEPCO headquarters will say things very clearly as far as their thinking was concerned. And in the overall exchange, everything was being done in a real-time manner. So therefore, when we went to the Prime Minister's residence, and the way of thinking and the way of doing things might not have been appropriate looking back on it. Well, after the accident happened until the 15th, this was a very important period of time. there was confusion on the part of the government in how it responded. Would you admit that? Of course there was confusion. It's exactly as you say. So therefore, the government, even under such circumstances, to be able to collect information in real time, those capabilities existed there. And if information could have been shared in a real-time manner, then such troublesome phone calls would not have been needed to have been made. What do you mean, troublesome phone calls? As I had stated earlier, the people on site were working very hard to try to deal with this situation. And from a remote area, there are questions that were not essential that were being asked, and all kinds of orders being given by persons who didn't really understand the situation on site. I'm talking about those phone calls. I regret to say I've only had one phone call, and I understand the content of that phone call, but I don't really know about the other phone calls and the content of those. I understand. Well, then I'd like to talk about, after the situation has been contained somewhat, what had happened. Yesterday from Vice Minister Matsunaga, there was a testimony that as far as this accident is concerned, the people who were hurt and injured on site, as well as the residents of the area, sustained much pain and suffering. And the people of Japan also were not able to receive the necessary electric supply. Do you also feel responsible that this was the case? For the first month or so, I really thought that it was most important to contain the situation as soon as possible. So a roadmap was drawn up within 1 month. There's all kinds of opinions, I'm sure, that can be expressed, but in the roadmap, there were objectives and purposes that needed to be attained and fulfilled in the medium and long term. And I think that it was around this time, about a year ago, right after the rainy season ends, there would be a high demand for electricity. And there would be a lot of shifting of the manufacturing base to the west side. So as far as the Minister of METI was concerned, we needed to think, and I needed to think foremost about the industry, and I was not able to do so adequately. This is very regrettable. Well, before that, there was a plant outage that was planned, and you are the person responsible for planning this. Yes, that is correct. As far as these planned outages were concerned, it was the first time that it had happened, but looking back on it now, perhaps there was a more rational way of going about doing this, do you think? When you say rational way, rather than that, it's something that really must be avoided at all costs and must not be done. A certain company representative had said that if electricity would not be provided, then the machines would have to stop, but this would be a problem. And so they stopped their operations. But then it seemed as if the supply continued, and they didn't need to stop their operations, and they were troubled, and economic problems were sustained, and people were laid off as a result. And why was it within the 23 wards of Tokyo that there weren't these outages taking place? A lot of people outside of the 23 wards of Tokyo felt that this was unfair. Do you feel any responsibility for any of this as minister? The 23 wards were exempted because of the transportation situation. It would mean that the signals would have to stop, and the policemen and policewomen would have to direct traffic, but they've gone to support the Fukushima area. So therefore, this was not possible. And Tokyo, of course, is the center of economy and other matters, and so it was very difficult to have these outages within Tokyo. And when these planned outages were conducted, It was delayed by 1 day, and the reason why this was delayed was because we had to think of hospitals. There were people who needed to have operations done, and there were people who were connected to various medical devices. We needed to be able to figure out how to assist these individuals, and I felt this was very important as minister. As far as the progress of events is concerned, you were the person who put a stoppage to that planned outage, or perhaps this was planned for, but there was an issue that was pointed out, so you therefore decided to delay it by 1 day? Well, the plan itself existed, but especially with regard to the hospitals and other places, we need to delay it by half a day or 1 day. And when I confirmed this, if something could be done by just delaying it half a day, I heard that it could be done. And I spoke to a friend from South Korea. It seems as if they have a lot of diesel generators for emergency purposes, and that has to do with the tension that South Korea faces with North Korea. So they have that infrastructure that is set up to a great degree, but Japan doesn't have that in place as yet. Well, as far as planned outages were concerned, to delay it by 1 day, it is the minister, you yourself, that decided needed to be delayed to save the lives of people, and it would be your achievement. I've never said it's my achievement. I have never said this and this is my achievement or these things are my achievements. And as far as hospitals are concerned, various people, we put our heads together, including the Chief Cabinet Secretary, and we decided that such a delay would be prudent. I do apologize for the question that I had asked. Now I'd like to shift to some other questions. Yesterday, former Vice Minister Matsunaga had talked about the scheme that had to do with compensation, and this too would be something that would place a burden on the people of our country. So therefore, this was one of the damages that would need to be sustained by the people of the country. That's what he had said. Do you also feel that way? Well, as far as the compensation for those who had suffered is concerned, there are various ministries that thought about this and what needed to be done. And I was the minister that put together the bill that had to do with compensating those who had suffered because of the accident. So I do feel that I was the person responsible for this. Within METI, I'm sure there were various proposals. Perhaps there should be legal proceedings taken against TEPCO, or perhaps we should categorize companies according to good companies or bad companies, or because this was something that occurred because of the tsunami and natural disaster, they would not have to bear responsibility. But as far as deciding the scheme, the process for how to deal with this situation, how did you partake in that?
Well, the last part of your question, Mr. Nomura, the exemption. Well, within the government, there was some such discussion to a certain extent, but I did not think that way, and nor did within METI people think that way. So that was not the case. Well, as for the other schemes or what you've referred to, well, I think and thought there were some things that we had to abide by, and well, as Mr. Nomura has stated, there were workers who are working hard at the site, so we have to compensate them. At the same time, there are the others, those people who are forced to evacuate. Again, we had to pay these people compensation. And we had to think of all these factors, and it's not just METI. Because this is a financial issue, we had to consult with the Ministry of Finance quite frequently, and as a result come up with such a scheme. Well, yesterday again I asked about this, and I was really astonished because one thing is that the power
utility. You have to give some consideration to the utility. But at the same time, you have to think about the fiscal situation of the government. Mr. Matsunaga said. But the first thing you should be thinking of is the victims. In other words, to quickly and appropriately compensate the victims. That was my thinking. But looking at the scheme, well, it was said that unless provisional payments are made, there are a number of victims who had problems making both ends meet. And it was pointed out that the scheme had problems, and as a result, the provisional payment was finally decided. But it doesn't seem that the victims were given first priority in the beginning when the scheme was put together. Well, about the provisional payment and scheme. Well, advancing the provisional payment is something that we repeatedly requested TEPCO to do. And the first money that came from the government, well, this money went to pay the insurance money for the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power station. But I stressed this within. But at the NAIIC also, we gave an evacuation order as well. So if we were to double, I don't remember what the amount was, but it was something around 240 billion. But if we were to multiply this by 2, it would be a major amount. So the first provisional payment was keeping in mind this 240 billion yen that we initially paid. And we were thinking that we could double this to 480 billion. But it turned out to be that the people who evacuated from Daiichi and NAIIC were almost the same, and those people who evacuated from Daiichi alone were limited in number. And that is the reason why the Ministry of Finance did not agree to this, I think, and that's what I heard. And therefore, if it's just for the Daiichi insurance money, we only did the payment based on this insurance money for Daiichi. But had it been that we were able to include NAIIC, then we could have paid more. And so this scheme, the latter scheme, came up later. I understand. I thought that was the case, but the Ministry of Finance resisted, and as a result, they were reluctant to pay this in cash. In other words, the minister, as minister, you were thinking that this money could be paid, but the Ministry of Finance was reluctant. At least some people in the government were reluctant to mobilize taxpayers' money to this extent. Is this correct? Well, I wanted to consult with the official at the Ministry of Finance, but I was not able to do so. But yes, I did talk with some of the people from the Ministry of Finance, and they said they could not do so. So within the government, there are people who had different thoughts about mobilizing taxpayers' money. And looking at this from our perspective, it seems to be that first priority is not given to the victims. That is the impression that we hold. Time is running out, and therefore I'd like to move on. But about the Hamaoka nuclear plant, it was stopped in May. This was the request to stop the Hamaoka nuclear power station. But was there a law based on which the request was made? Well, no, there is no law, and therefore it was a request. It was an administrative instruction, a request. Let me ask some things about this. Yes, Mr. Ishibashi. My name is Ishibashi. How do you do? Well, about Hamaoka. Well, I'd like to ask some questions about tsunami and earthquakes. Well, last May 5th, I believe you visited Hamaoka nuclear power station. And what was your impression? What did you strongly feel? And it's almost a year since then. But what are your thoughts now? Well, this has been reported through the news to a certain extent, but could you briefly and candidly state what you thought and what you think now? Well, I was thinking that it is important that we visit the site before you make any decision to instruct people to stop or restart the nuclear power station. And I did visit, for example, Onagawa and others. Yes, there's a sand dune, which is thought to be a wall to prevent the tsunami waves. But there are trees planted, but the bamboo trees are short. Yes, the bamboo trees are short. And I thought that if tsunami waves were to hit the area, this would not be enough to prevent the tsunami waves. I thought that Hamaka was risky and it should be stopped. And on May 5th, from the coast, I saw these forests, the power station from the coastal line. I thought it had to be stopped. Now, 1 year has passed. What are your thoughts about Hamaoka now? Well, the situation remains unchanged, and so I think it should remain unchanged. Well, when you went to the site last year, were you worried only about the tsunami waves? Well, if, for example, right under the Hamaoka nuclear plant, there is this major tectonic plate, and if a major earthquake were to hit the power station, the power station would be shaken for a long period of time. Did you feel this risk when you visited the site? Well, yes, there are two plates. I love the sea, by the way, but I did not feel that the plates are there. But the tectonic plates, which are at the bottom, well, they tend to experience earthquakes with a magnitude of 8 or 7 if it's right underneath. I'm sure you're all experts. So I did feel that it's scary to think that an earthquake were to hit Hamaoka in such a way. So that was one of the reasons why the instructions were given to stop the operation. But if you were to ask me if going to the site I felt this fear, the answer is no. Well, after the Fukushima accident, people are focused on tsunami waves, and I don't think there is enough attention being paid to the earthquake tremors. Mr. KAIEDA, well, listening to what you had to say in June at the Diet, you said that the direct cause of this accident was tsunami waves. But the investigation is not progressing to a great extent, but there are different views about this. For example, on April 6th this year, the new safety standard that the 4 ministers decided on. Looking at the document, it says that the major facilities which have major safety functions, well, at this point in time, it is not for sure whether there were some minor damages made to these facilities. In other words, to rephrase what it says in this document, it says that these major facilities which have a major safety function, it is not known whether or not the earthquake has caused damages, but at the same time, this means that this possibility cannot be ruled out. And 1 year has passed since then, and it's not always the case where we should be focusing only on tsunami waves. But what are your thoughts about this?
Regarding what you had just said, Mr. Ishibashi, when was it? The people of METI and the TEPCO people gave various opinions. I felt that that was not sufficient. There is a Dr. Goto who is very famous. I've heard his opinion outside of METI. And he is an engineer at Hitachi, and he knows about the #1 unit. And he's very familiar with nuclear reactors. And he was someone that's always been emphasizing the effect of earthquakes, especially around the suppression chamber. there's all kinds of pipes there. So therefore, Unit 1 and Unit 2. Unit 1 is the same as Fukushima in terms of its configuration. If you could point out if I'm mistaken, but I did look at it. This is something that can't be looked at. And then I went to Onagawa, and at that time, I looked at the fuel pool. And there at Onagawa, there's all kinds of creative ideas being put into action. And the pipes, for example, there's all kinds of supporting material that's utilized for that. And so there's been a lot of different things done to assure further safety. However, in Fukushima, at the nuclear power plant there, it wasn't really being done so much, was what I thought. I am Tanaka, a member of this commission. You talked about Dr. Masashi Goto, and I went with Dr. Goto, and it was actually myself that gave that explanation. He is actually an investor, so it was actually myself that gave that explanation. I do apologize, putting aside Hitachi. So there was, from Chubu Electric Power Company, a request that Hamaoka be stopped, but the other nuclear power plants could continue to be operated. And the prospects for earthquakes happening in the long term, the likelihood of that would be lower in comparison to the other nuclear power plant areas. Do you feel, Mr. KAIEDA, that that's the case still? The other nuclear power plants are safe. That's not the thinking, I don't think. What we need to fear the most, including earthquakes, is that when we think about these tectonic plates and the plates moving up and down, this is something that's a huge risk. So we need to be able to prepare for that. And there's, of course, all kinds of countermeasures, safety-wise, that we can put together medium and long term. And this is something that I've been very interested in. With regard to the durability and the age of the reactors, for example, there's neutrons, for example, in the case of that are emitted, and there might be degradation that might take place and whatnot. So even when I went to Genkai, the second unit and the third unit are fine, but I didn't go to Unit 1. It's 37 years since the Unit 1 was built, and there's the neutron brittleness issue that exists. So therefore, I was concerned about this. And there are some troubles that have arisen vis-a-vis these reactors from time to time. But that is an issue that needs to be dealt with. So I didn't think that they were all okay. By no means did I feel that way. Yes, I understand. Those are the issues that do exist. But generally speaking, when we think about politicians, whether they be on the national level or the local jurisdictional level, and the people of the areas, when we think about nuclear power plants and the safety of that, that needs to be checked. And the safety needs to be checked very thoroughly before the nuclear power plants are to be started up again. This is something that's mentioned time and again by very many people, including yourself, Mr. KAIEDA. However, when we think about terrorist acts and we think about airplanes perhaps crashing into these power plants, even if we don't discuss those, there's earthquakes, there's perhaps eruption of volcanoes, and also mudslides and tornadoes and other natural phenomena that occur. And these are very severe and also occur quite frequently. So therefore, the safety of nuclear power plants, whether or not it's really possible to firmly assure that, If you cross a road, you look at the left and the right before you cross to make sure that cars are not coming. And that's a way in which to confirm one's own safety. But when we think about the nuclear power plants here in Japan, is there really a way that we can really confirm that they will be safe no matter what? What do you think? It's a very difficult question to answer, I feel. With regard to confirming this in a thorough manner, that's something that I've thought about time and again as well. I also went to these sites to look at the sites with my very own eyes. Mr. Ishibashi, you had talked about the various risks that we live with. There's also the human risk that we live with, quite honestly. Let's say, for example, this is something that was quite interesting when I went to Onagawa, the Tohoku Electric Power Company people were saying that the operation of nuclear power plants necessitates a certain technique, just like driving a vehicle. And we feel that we are number one amongst all the electric power companies. And for us, as far as reactors are concerned, we only have 4 reactors at Tohoku Electric, Higashidori and the Onagawa ones. And each of them we are operating very carefully. And how was Tokyo Electric Power Company? They've had many dozens of them, and maybe they were not operating them as safely as we had been, and paying as close attention to each and every one of them as we do. So having heard what they had to say, I felt that this was very important. And with regard to the people on site, this is an issue as well. At Genkai as well, the Kyushu Electric Power Company president, you know what happened to him. So there really needs to be a final decision made with regard to that. On the 17th of June of last year, there was the Great East Japan Disaster Recovery and Restoration Commission that was put together. And there you talked about, in answer to the questions asked of you, that the Fukushima nuclear power plant agency safety needed to be assured. And there's also these laws that exist, and these need to be corrected and reformed. And the technical standards, of course, need to be reviewed and reformed as necessary. This is correct, is it not, that you said all these things? Yes, that's exactly as you say. And here at this special commission in the House of Representatives, there was Mr. Watanabe and former Prime Minister Khan, who had said that the safety judgment was not completely adequate. So when we think about a vehicle, if we were to talk about it in terms of a vehicle, if there was a vehicle accident that had happened, then it would have been the technical guidelines of the inspection, perhaps, that had been questionable. And maybe the inspection was not conducted accurately, and the vehicle was still being utilized on the roads. What do you think about that argument?
Well, it could be as such, yes. Well, then, in response to the Fukushima accident, what you need to do is that, well, using analogy of cars, you need to look into the technical problems vis-a-vis the car inspection system, and try to apply this new car inspection guideline system on all cars so as to enhance safety and be able to use the cars. I think it's only natural that you think that way, right? Yes, I agree. But during that time, it's not
the case? Well, the question is whether you're going to park the car in your garage in the meantime, or in the meantime continue to drive with great care. I think there are two different groups of people. Well, people who use the cars, I would think that way, but about the pedestrians who know nothing about such things, well, the fact that cars which have gone through this insufficient, faulty car inspection would be a problem for them. And I think that this is the reason why the Japanese people are reacting so badly against the nuclear power stations. After Fukushima, what the Japanese people want to see most is that these safety guidelines or the technical guidelines of METI be quickly improved and applied to all the power stations in Japan. For example, try to ensure through these guidelines so that the anti-seismic measures be set up on the safer side. And if that were to be the case, then all the safety standards would be improved. And where necessary, there need to be reinforcement vis-a-vis possible earthquakes. And this will lead the way to restart. But, for example, at the March 30th emergency meeting, well, people were focused on tsunami, and then on June 18th, there was the safety declaration, and then in July, on July 11th, the stress test was introduced. And so I think that you need to have a system where you have a robust system in place to ensure safety, whereas what you're doing now is like a stopgap measure, a series of stopgap measures, and that is causing the concern of the Japanese people. What is your response to this? Well, I do know that there are such opinions. I'm fully aware of that. And, well, as I said, there are people who would opt to keep their cars parked in the garage. Others would carefully want to continue to drive. But you mentioned that we have to think about pedestrians. Well, I was a METI minister back then, and therefore I was on the side of the drivers. I hope that you understand my responsibility role as METI minister. Well, of course, I understand that, and there is this major issue of the energy policy, but there is need for power, and there is need to restart the nuclear power stations. And given that situation, I think it is important that you ensure the safety. And yet, and it could be that in the meantime, you carefully try to operate the nuclear power stations. Well, out of necessity, it would be like trying to drive, keeping your fingers crossed that nothing would happen. Well, but I think the shorter the better, that sort of interval period. And in the meantime, there needs to be a secure safety standard put in place. And I'm sure that there are technicians, engineers here. I think that there is a need to establish such a guideline at the relevant committees or commissions. Well, if I may follow up on that, I'd like to ask some similar questions, but Minister, excuse me. Well, you were METI minister, and you said that being METI minister, you were on the driver's side, and it was important that stable power supply be ensured to the people, I think. But if that is the case, as Mr. Ishibashi was saying, using this approach, did you think that the public would accept this, or did you anticipate that there will be strong resistance from the people to restart the nuclear power stations? And, well, this summer again, we're talking about the possible shortage of power. But given this situation, even the drivers' logic, had it been that you had changed to a more cautious, secure guideline standard, things would have been better? Well, yes, if you talk about public acceptance, I do agree with you on that point. excuse me, I literally said the insurance money was 240 billion, but it was half that, 120 billion. Let me make that correction. Well, yes. Well, looking back, I think there are a number of things that you could say, but this summer, people are bracing themselves for a hard summer. We'll have to save up on a lot of energy, and the industry will suffer. It could be that there will be economic losses, and this could undermine Japan's economic growth. There are many such possibilities we see. Now, you say that as minister you are on the driver's side, but should it have been that you looked further down the road and at an early stage think about introducing a tougher standard? Couldn't you have done that? Well, I'm not going to make any excuses, and I will accept your criticism. What has been done has been done. But the Prime Minister himself, I think, was thinking of introducing stricter standards. But within the government, you, as minister, with the exception of Hamaoka, you were thinking that you could restart the nuclear power stations. And I think that you were preaching what METI was thinking. But if there were different opinions within the government, should it have been that you listened more carefully to what the others were saying? Well, yes, I do believe that is the case. When I returned from Genkai, I did hear the Prime Minister say such things. And from the next day, we tried to discuss what sort of provisional safety standards could be introduced to enhance safety. Well, what Mr. Nomura just stated, well, on June 18th, was it, that I talked about the restart? Well, within the government, I don't think that there were any opposition stated from the government. Well, I had attended a number of economic ministerial meetings, or I did make such statements at different occasions, but there was no objection to that. And the Prime Minister Khan, it was on June 7th, and at the New Growth Realization meeting, he did talk about restarts. And on the 19th, June 19th, the next day, yes, at the public dialogue on natural energy, he stated that he agrees with METI minister. So I think that within the government, within the cabinet, if there were opinions people saying that KAIEDA is going too far, I was willing to listen, but that was not the case. But the METI that you were supporting, what was the opinion within METI? Well, METI, well, especially the Agency for Natural Resources and Energy, was thinking about promoting the restart. And when I went to Genkai, well, the original schedule was that I would not go directly to the nuclear power station, but I would meet with the town mayor and talk with the town mayor of Genkai. But I was thinking that I shouldn't travel all the way to Genkai and not look at the nuclear power station. So I had the schedule changed, and so for me to observe the power station, and it could have been that I was hoping that things would progress smoothly, but I thought that I should do everything within my responsibility to ensure safety. Well, I do understand what you're saying, but Prime Minister Khan all of a sudden started to talk about stress tests. And, this seems to suggest that the standards that existed up to that point in time were not sufficient. I think this was what he was trying to say on behalf of the government. Well, had it been that instead of stress tests, as Mr. Ishibashi has been saying, had it been that, for example, the anti-earthquake back check didn't you think that you should give priority to strengthening the existing back check?
The anti-seismic back check needed to be done for quite a while, and it wasn't being done. So this was something that really needed to be done. And the stress test, of course, was mentioned, and this became one of the criteria for restarting the power stations. At that point, what sort of criteria would there be? The stress test would be the foremost criteria. I felt then as well. So we had a dialogue to decide what needed to be done. Looking back on it, as far as stress tests are concerned, to what degree can the power station withstand it? But what's most important is to figure out what is necessary on the ground. And that's something that has been done with the anti-seismic back check, and such a process already had existed. So therefore, not the stress test, but rather the anti-seismic back check. If this could have been utilized as the criteria for restart, then it might have been different now from what it is. Didn't you think that way back then? At that time, we did not think about that, but Mr. Nomura, having heard what you just said, I do feel that this could have been one of the options. Whether or not it could be the criteria for restarting that needed to be fulfilled, but such a back check would have been necessary, I do feel, looking back. As far as the operators are concerned, they voluntarily, on schedule, have been doing their backup tests. But when the reactors are to be operated, this is a major theme. And if the operation of those reactors and the back check were in parallel with one another, this could have been, were linked up with one another. It could have been thought of that way. No, we didn't think about it that way. As far as the stress test was concerned, who was it that mentioned this as an idea in the first place? I came back from Genkai and went to the Prime Minister's residence the next day. So, therefore, it was within the walls of the Prime Minister's residence. Is it correct in understanding that it was the Prime Minister? The Prime Minister had various people around him that provided all kinds of opinions and were the brain, shall we say, that gave these ideas to the Prime Minister. I mentioned this earlier as well. To provide energy in a stable manner, if this is not done, then huge losses would be sustained. This summer, in reality, in Japan, there is this high likelihood and danger that we would sustain quite a lot of economic losses. If that is the case, then there needs to be effort made to avoid that, and that needs to be done on a political level. And having come here, there are 30 items that talk about the technical perspectives, viewpoints. But it seems as if we cannot receive the understanding of the people. We really needed to have the necessary considerations being made back when they ought to have been made during the earlier stages. What do you think about this, former Minister KAIEDA? When you say the earlier stages, when do you mean? Well, this time, when we think about electric supply, there's a lot of people who are anxious about that and worrying about economic losses, and it's all because that accident had occurred. If that is the case, then after the accident had occurred, when you think about the stable provisioning of electric power, you needed to think about that. And as far as METI was concerned, based upon the logic that you utilize when you operate these nuclear power stations, perhaps you were focusing too much on just restarting these, but rather in dealing with the situation, you need to be able to come up with the necessary standards to deal with the situation. Didn't you feel that was the case? As far as this is concerned, Before I left my position as Minister of the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, what else is it that I needed to do? I thought about that, and one of the things that came to mind is to make NISA an independent body. I really didn't do that. And there's been a lot of supply side emphasis, and there needed to be more energy policy and an administration focusing on the demand side and putting more weight on that side. I wondered about this. So as far as that is concerned, even now, when I think about supply and demand and how the balance between the two would be, it's something that I think about. Thank you very much. We don't have very much time left at all, so I just like to wrap up my questions. As far as this accident is concerned, TEPCO has been saying that it's a natural disaster. It's a natural disaster that had occurred that made this accident happen. And a lot of the people of the country wonder whether it was a man-made mistake that gave rise to this accident. As far as the person responsible at that time, the minister in charge at that time, when you think about natural disaster versus man-made disaster, what proportion would each of these make up? This is a very difficult question. I don't think it's zero. And with regard to man-made disaster, recently, what's become clear is that as far as the tsunami height and the force of the earthquake are concerned, it was about 2 years ago. There had been a new forecast predictions that had been issued. So in light of those, to a certain, in a certain way, you could say it was man-made. So therefore, on the part of the government, there ought to have been more stringent rules put into place, then perhaps this accident might have been avoided or kept at a very minimum in terms of the damages sustained. Well, with regard to the rulemaking, I'm not sure to what extent that could have been the case. But it was the first time that anything of this sort had occurred. And in October of last year, I was working on something else. Every October, there's a training that keeps in mind the possibility of such accidents happening at nuclear power stations, whether it be speedy or other techniques that could have been adopted. That wasn't something that I was made aware of as minister. So therefore, speedy wasn't being utilized even a day after the accident. So if I had known about the existence of speedy, I could have said that it ought to have been used. I'd just like to say one thing. You've been able to give us a very frank discussion. Would it be all right for us to extend this session by 30 minutes at a maximum? Thank you very much. We'd like to ask for your time. Yes, I do apologize. If you could make it 20 minutes instead of 30, because I am becoming rather exhausted and must run to the toilet as well. Well, on the part of the government, there are some things that needed to be reflected upon. But as far as TEPCO side was concerned, perhaps there were man-made mistakes that they made. Do you think that is the case?
Well, I believe that the members of the Commission here should look into this and reach some sort of conclusion, but I wouldn't say that there were no mistakes. I think it's better for us to think about that there were mistakes and think about how serious these mistakes were. Well, I don't have time to go into the details, but after me, the chairman has said I'm very candid, but the fact that we could not prevent the hydrogen explosion, I think
was something that we need to think about. Once I started to read about 3 Mile Island and also Chernobyl. Chernobyl is slightly different, but 3 Mile does talk about a great deal about what to do about hydrogen explosions. But the fact that nothing was done until the hydrogen explosion occurred, and the fact that people did not point out this risk is something that is a problem and has led to the release of a large amount of radioactive substances. So this is something that we have to learn from. May I? May I? This side? Can you be brief? Now, about the hydrogen explosion, then this concerns me. Now, you're saying that no one was thinking about that possibility of a hydrogen explosion. Was it truly so? Was no one at that time, including the NAIIC Director General, not talking about such a possibility? Mr. Tanaka, I apologize earlier, but at least I was not hearing this term hydrogen explosion. So when the explosion occurred, I really wondered what had happened. That was my honest reaction. Just one more. The United States, ever since they've stopped building new nuclear power stations, I'm a generation that belongs to the generation before that. And yes, so the United States was a mentor, be it the production or maintenance of nuclear power stations. But once U.S. withdrew, Japan had the thinking that they were the leaders in this field. The old generation has left us, and the people of the new generation, including the nuclear reactor manufacturers and also the TEPCO and METI people, they're all young people these days. And it could have been that these younger people had the thoughts that they had nothing to learn from the United States. In 1985, in the United States, they were saying that such a hydrogen explosion could occur in a matter of few hours. But many of the young people in Japan did not even know about that. It's as I said, I hadn't heard about this, but whether the people around me knew of such a possibility is something that I really cannot answer. Again, this might be something that Mr. Tanaka said, but in the early 1980s, as you said, Japan's nuclear safety was high, but from the mid-80s, people point out that Japan started to lag behind. Mr. Tanaka, I think you've said this, and others as well. And so it has this myth that nuclear is safe, and people became quite complacent in the so-called nuclear village. I'm sorry, we're running out of time. Let me just make a statement, and then I'd like to give the opportunity to Mr. Sakurai. But about the venting, about the seawater injection, and you say that TEPCO appeared to be rather reluctant, thinking that this would lead to decommissioning. Why did you feel that way? I don't know if it was at the time of venting or a later stage, but we were saying that at Fukushima Daiichi such an accident occurred, and it's not the case where number 5 and number 6 units were unharmed. So we were saying that number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 units were all going to have to be scrapped. But when it came to number 5 and number 6 units, it was difficult for people to talk about decommissioning, and the people at TEPCO were reluctant to talk about that. Would you like to go to the restroom and break for 5 minutes and continue until 5:30? No, you can continue. All right. Then excuse us and let us continue, and we'll end by 5:30, we promise. My name is Hachisuka. I'm listening to Mr. KAIEDA. I'm one of the evacuees. And at that time, were not informed of anything, and we were told to evacuate. But I now feel and understand that you've gone through a lot of hardships at that time. I have two questions. Well, there was earlier talk about the time when people would try to retreat from the offsite, but you said that there was need to ensure that the hospitals were safe before everyone decided to leave. Well, in Okuma, there are many hospitals, and there were hospitals that went to the offsite to consult. And when the people from the hospital went to the offsite center, they didn't know whether they could go inside or not. And some people just decided not to go inside, and they said some hospital officials say that they thought that there were no people inside. Now, yes, despite the fact that U.S. minister said that you wanted the people at the offsite center to confirm the safety of the hospitals, was it the case where the people at the offsite center had still left the offsite center? And also on July 7th, when I was watching TV at the diet, you looked very anguished and frustrated. It seemed to be that you were saying that you wanted to help more the evacuees, but Mr. Khan is not listening to you. Well, so I got the impression that you were trying to express your frustration that you wanted to do more for the victims and yet were unable to do so. Now, Mr. KAIEDA, well, at that time and even today, if you have some feelings that you'd like to share with us, that you wanted to do more for the victims, please share that feeling with us now. Well, at the time of the accident, it was not just me, but there are many lawmakers in this room. Well, I think lawmakers are all like this, but they want to do something for the victims. Everyone thought that way, but I just happened to be the Minister of METI. And as METI minister, I was able to do a lot of things that the other lawmakers were not capable of doing. So I tried to take advantage of my position as minister to assist people. You can ask other people as well. So there were a number of lawmakers who wanted to do more, but were not in a position to do more. There are many, many such people. And I want you to not forget that there were many such lawmakers. And what I really feel I need to do more is about the decontamination. As to how to go about with this, there are different opinions, there are different ideas about this. And when we talk about decontamination, this means that we want people who can return to their homes to return home to the place where they were grown up and lived. But Okuma is in a difficult situation, and I wonder what we could do for the people of Okuma. I think all Diet members have to think about that. And about the offsite center, I know what time they closed down the center, and I think that what you said might have happened just around that timing. And I talked with the local response headquarters chief, Mr. Ikeda, over the phone, and I told him that they could not close down the offsite center so early. There were hospitals at Okuma town which remained, and it was a it became a no-access zone. And I do know that some people died. And I think that they are also victims of this disaster. And I really feel sorry about that.
The offsite center people were working very hard. But the first offsite center was not working, so the nuclear off-site center was right next to it, and that might have made things more difficult to figure out on the part of the local residents which to go to. I'd just like to go back to the response in relation to the accident. You talked about the integrated headquarters at TEPCO earlier, and the necessity of that has been explained, and we understand the necessity of such a thing having been established. Were there some disadvantages or risks that needed to be sustained or were experienced as a result of putting the headquarters here at TEPCO? Well, we had that integrated headquarters, and it was an advantage to integrate. But it's not as if there are no disadvantages in coming up with that government TEPCO integrated response office. I'm sure that there are those times that I was at the Diet or I was at the ministry for quite long periods of time. So for the TEPCO people, sometimes I would wonder about them and what they might be up to. I decided, for example, to discipline myself. For example, bento lunchbox might be prepared, but I would not take that, and perhaps I might just drink the very minimum of coffee. And no matter how long the time was that I needed to be there, I was there with them. But as far as those risks are concerned and disadvantages, I'm not too certain, but it was good that we came up with that office. Yes, I understand. Earlier you talked about the venting and the seawater injection and the retreat of the personnel. Each of the members of the government went through a lot of difficulty and had to make some difficult decisions. We were talking about the contaminated water issue and other issues. It seems as if the government, in reality, took the burden upon itself to deal with these difficult issues and to come up with the decisions necessary to deal with these difficult issues. What do you think as former minister? Well, that's not something that we thought about very much. We felt that we weren't doing enough, in fact. At that time, I felt that way as well. That is, this might be a future discussion that would take place, but when we think about the private sector operator and whether such an operator would be able to conduct its nuclear power station business and decommissioning and the spent fuel and how that needs to be dealt with, perhaps that's something that the country needs to take responsibility for. So therefore, to leave it up to the operators, that was not the way to go about it. We could have done more. Ms. Hachiska had talked about the evacuees and the residents of that area, and it was difficult for them to communicate with one another and with the outside. Of course, there's system-related issues, but the government could have made more efforts, and for the residents and the evacuees, did you make the utmost efforts to deal with all the issues that they were grappling with? As far as that is concerned, the people of that area, the evacuees, have their own thoughts, I'm sure. I could say, we did this or we did that, but that would just be on our part, us saying so. And how was it that we looked at it, and how was it that the local residents and evacuees looked at the situation and how we dealt with it? That's very important. and the provisioning of the donations for those people in the area. Most of them were in the evacuation centers, the shelters. Could they not receive it there? And then the provisional payments, could they not have been given to these people there? It was perhaps about 1 million yen or several tens of thousands of yen we were discussing, and perhaps giving this as a payment right away might be a criminal offense. There was that kind of possibility and the risk, and such payments were delayed very much. So many people just left with their own clothes on their back. And we could have been more swift in how we dealt with that situation. This goes without saying. When we think about the people of the area, the evacuees, and the people of the country, accurate information needed to be disclosed as soon as possible, and such a posture needed to be shown. Yes, that's correct. I'd just like to ask one thing. At the NISA press conference, there was a meltdown possibility that was mentioned with regard to the reactor core. Of course, we don't have very much time, so we can't have you delve into this. But you do understand that this was taken up as a topic when you were minister at that time. Yes, I do understand the situation had changed, but it was not our order to do this. Do you understand what sort of issue had arisen as a result of the deputy director's statement? At that time, I was at the Prime Minister's residence, and I was not watching that press conference very much on TV. Or shall I say, I wasn't watching it at all. At the National Diet as well, there were very many questions that were asked regarding that. Was the word meltdown used? It was a reactor core meltdown. So, as a result, things changing, I did understand that. As the minister who was in charge, when you think about the people in charge who had changed at NISA, they no longer were referring to the reactor core meltdown. When you think about NISA and METI's statements after the fact, it seemed as if the people became very distrustful. Looking back on it as minister, how do you feel about that? I believe it was since we entered the month of April, at the committee in the National Diet, this was raised as an issue quite a bit, and we needed to have the TEPCO engineers come in and sort out the terminology. And at that time, various kinds of phenomena are not very clear. But at the current point in time, what can be said? I asked. That is, that the fuel pellets had melted down. So what is known now, to accurately relate that and to think about the future danger, what's not known, but something that had occurred in the past, to make assumptions about that. And the issues related to that and how to talk about those issues, I wondered about that. However, as far as I'm concerned, there were several press conferences that were held, of course. But to publicize such things to the outside world is a very important thing. I did come to this understanding, very much so. I understand. Well, if you would please refer to your material here. 311 at that time, I'd like to ask a question related to that.
Well, there are a number of things that happened, but there was the nuclear Emergency Response Headquarters, and also the Minister of METI, who served as the chief of this headquarters. And also there was NISA, which serving as the secretariat, and also there's the 5th floor, and also the 2nd floor, and also the off-site center. And I don't think that this center was functioning as it should have. So looking at this organization, what is the observation as the then minister? Well, within this chart, organization chart, I really don't know what this Prime Minister's office 2nd floor is doing. But having said that, I'd like to share my observation. Well, it's not just this, but there are different organizations. You talked about the planned outage, and at the time of the planned outage as well, there was some discussion as to which organization should be deciding what. And it did take quite some time to communicate and how to announce the information. Again, there were a number of problems in terms of the information giving. Well, at times of emergency, we have to have slim organizations as much as possible, and each and every individual needs to know what they need to do and be able to act. Well, in hindsight, the role of NISA, do you think NISA was able to fulfill its role? Well, NISA did try hard, but it was not up to the expectation of the Japanese people. I think they fell short of the expectations, but, well, there will be a new regulatory agency or committee, but these people will be transferred to this new organization. I'm sure they will be, and they need to be aware of this fact, and we seek for your guidance. May I? Yes, about the 5th floor of the Prime Minister's office. Well, many of the decisions were made on this 5th floor. And, well, I don't think that this was the original plan, but why do you think this organization became like what it is as we see here in this paper? Well, first there was the earthquake and the tsunami waves that hit Japan, and so the emergency response center had their hands full with that. Of course, there was this small island like the nuclear emergency response headquarters, but this was not sufficient, so they had to move to the 2nd floor, the mezzanine floor, and there is no television there. And also, we could not hold meetings. Well, but when Prime Minister went to Fukushima, we wanted to hold a meeting to discuss what would be happening from here and after. I had my secretary look for a room, and there was this reception room, and we were told that the cellular phones can be used in this room, but it's a reception room. And we brought in TVs and also whiteboards from different places. It was not a meeting room. And, ERC had their functions, but until we went to TEPCO on the 15th, we had a lot of problems there. Well, this will be my last question. When we think about the future, well, as the then minister, in what way do you think we should be building organizations of this sort to respond to emergencies? Well, this is something that should never happen again. But
I think that the regulatory agency has to be independent. We need to have a lot of talented people allocated, and make sure that safety regulations are in place. After the accident occurred, well, as I said, well, the government could be taking the lead in dealing with nuclear accidents, but I think that we need to have an emergency squad-like organization which can move quickly. Well, the United States NRC has such a unit, and there are a number of ex-Marines and people who experience working on at nuclear stations. But we need to have such a similar emergency squad, people who could work in the front line and who have knowledge about how to protect themselves from radiation and have the equipment to do so. I think we need to have such a unit in place. Thank you. Lastly, well, this is a major crisis that has attracted a great deal of attention from overseas. And we've asked Mr. Matsunaga yesterday about this. But in times of emergency like this, well, in case of emergency, well, I think that the politicians and operators and also the regulatory agencies, we have to wonder whether the talent that is needed is being developed, and also people there are willing to take the responsibility that needs to be taken. Well, you were the then METI minister, and yesterday, now, about the planned outage. There was last summer we had this problem, and this summer again. Well, as I said, in the June 18th statement, you said that you said that you gave the instructions on March 30th to ensure that even in case the AC power source is lost, that you could respond to such cases, and as a result, you say that the nuclear power stations can be restarted. And well, this is not your thinking alone that you said so. I'm sure that people who have a great deal of experience at METI were giving you advice in making this statement. But for example, when we think about back then, were you predicting what might be happening this year, and whether you gave instructions, keeping in mind what could be happening next year? I asked this question to Mr. Matsunaga, I think that it's necessary for the politicians, the bureaucrats, and the private sector people to think about their responsibility and think ahead for the mid to long term. If you could just share with us some of your thoughts as to what lessons should be learned for the mid to long term future. Well, yes, a year has passed. A year and a few months have passed since the accident occurred. And, well, when we talk about restart and energy issues, it's a year since this problem came about. And if you were to ask if we made great progress since then, I think the answer is no. Well, looking at the opinion polls, the number of people who are opposed to the restart. Well, when I was minister, I think that the number of people were undecided. And of course, there was others who were absolutely opposed to the idea of restarting. But I think the number of people said that they're undecided. But these days, we see that many of these people who said that they were undecided have opted to oppose the idea of restart. And looking at this, well, including my personal experience, I wonder what I have been doing over the past year. So, of course, Yes, it is necessary to think about energy conservation, but at the same time, we have to think about the energy policy on the whole. And also, be it the regulatory committee or agency, this new organization needs to be set up as early as possible so that this new organization can function fully.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm sure we can still continue with our questions and answers. But we have received some extra time, and now we would need to conclude today's testimony. Thank you very much, Mr. KAIEDA, for your time today. Please feel free to leave the room now. Thank you very much again for your time. The third item today that we will be raising as our agenda item has to do with the law on Fukushima nuclear accident Independent Investigation Commission of the National Diet of Japan and Article 12, Clause 1. This time we have distributed to the members of the Commission materials which we would like to have you please look through. According to the materials distributed before you, under this law, under Article 12, Clause 1, the documents, including electromagnetic records and other documents, can be requested as materials. And this has to do with the investigation methodology and investigation content, and in light of those, if they are not suited for publicizing, if they are to be publicly disclosed, then the interests of third parties as well as the interests of the public might be infringed upon. So therefore, based upon the operation rules, there is a stipulation under Article 7, Clause 6, that the content of these documents and materials would not be disclosed. This would just be distributed to the members of the Commission and not to the observers, if the observers would be so kind as to understand. We would like to have Mr. Anjo give an explanation from the Secretariat. As far as the documents that have been distributed are concerned, Material 1.1 has to do with the Nuclear Safety Commission, and Document 1.2, this has to do with the Federation of Electric Power Companies, and 1.3 is MEXT, and 1.4 is TEPCO. And as far as the documents and the electromagnetic records that are held by these parties, they would make these up. As far as these materials are concerned, vis-a-vis these companies or organizations, we explained the necessity for the purposes of our investigation to receive these materials from these organizations and companies. Regrettably, until today, we were not able to have, and we still do not have cooperation from these companies and organizations regarding the submittal of these documents and electromagnetic materials. According to our law under Article 12.1, when such an investigation is to be conducted by the committee, and if there is a necessity for such materials to be submitted to the Commission, then such materials can be requested. And they need to respond to such a request for the submittal of documents and electromagnetic materials. As far as 1.1 through 1.4 are concerned, for our investigatory purposes, the submittal of these documents and electromagnetic recording materials are requested. And here in this commission, in order to formally state the necessity of receiving these documents and materials, we would like to ask you all as members of the commission whether such materials would be necessary to be submitted from parties 1-1 through 1-4. And if we could please have you consider and decide whether we as a commission would like to have that done. Thank you very much, Mr. Anjo. Are there any opinions you would like to express, including those areas for which you are each responsible for? Would this be all right then? Would it be all right, members of the commission? Well then, thank you very much. Regarding materials 1-1 through 1-4, the paper documents, electromagnetic records, and other documents are necessary for the purposes of our investigation into the Fukushima accident. Therefore, under the law, under Article 12, Clause 1, we would request that the materials, including the documents and electromagnetic recording materials and other materials, be submitted from 1-1, the Nuclear Safety Commission, and 1-2 from the Federation of Electric Power Companies, 1-3 from MEXT, and 1-4 from TEPCO. There has not been any opposition. We have resolved that this request has been made. And as far as each of the organizations and companies, the documents and the electromagnetic recording materials, as well as other materials, will be requested to be submitted, and I will be in charge of requesting these materials. If there is no opposition, I would like to take that upon myself to do so. We are taking a lot of time today. However, we have one other item on the agenda we would like to take up today, if we may. As far as our commission is concerned, it was established on the 8th of December of 2011, and we decided to work for a period of 6 months to put together a report based on the investigation that we have conducted and have taken upon us as our mission to do so under what has been stipulated under the law. And I would like to summarize the work that we have been conducting. And if you will refer to your materials now, I would like to summarize the work that we have been conducting thus far. We have not distributed this to everyone who is here in our meeting room, but we'd like to have Chief Investigator Mr. Nomura give an explanation regarding this.
Thank you very much for your time. Well, as the chairman has just explained, the report has to be put together at the end of this process. But during this process, already we have put together certain ideas and issues that need to be raised. And so we want to try to disclose this information in stages. Now, this will be the first stage. And there are certain discussion points that we have been taking up at this commission, be it this public session and also through our investigation. And so I'd like to raise 5 points that we would like to address. And having said so, we would like to confirm amongst the commission members that these are the discussion points that we should be taking up within our commission. And after that, as the chairman has said, through our website and try to disclose this information to the public.
Now, please refer to the documents. First point. Well, after this accident, in thinking about the future measures to be taken, we should not just identify the specific cause of this accident, but instead try to select the issues to be addressed from a broader, deeper perspective. In other words, what this means is that up until this point in time, we have tried to focus on the cause of this accident and think about the response to this cause. And this is a sort of cycle that Japan has been falling into. But it is necessary for us to think about different possibilities and to think about what responses need to be taken in the event of different types of problems. So this is the first point that we would like to be examined and discussed within our commission. The second point is to refer to overseas and state-of-the-art information and try to establish a system to incorporate these best cases. And this is something that I believe is missing. And in our report that we'll be compiling, we would like to try to put together the information in such a way that we can learn from these best cases. Well, as been saying, we have been, as we've saw in the case of IAEA, the points that have been raised by the agency have not necessarily been reflected in the regulations in Japan. We believe that this is a problem in itself, but in addition to that, the fact that these things were not included into the safety rules of Japan is partially attributable to the systematic problems that we have. And the third point, well, the current regulatory agency is lacking safety culture. And as an organization, it needs to enhance its transparency and accountability. And it has been lacking this operating rules in the past. Well, when we say safety culture, this is something that we should be looking into. And there's a need to try to improve safety to the best means possible and require the operators to do so. And it is also constantly necessary for the regulators to reflect the state-of-the-art information related to safety in the regulations. And well, this has been decisively missing from our system. And therefore, we need to put in place a mechanism to try to fill in this shortcoming so that we can have more transparent, independent, and more professional mechanisms. So, yes, it might be that we were looking into just the system, but it's not just the safety culture, realizing of the safety culture. It's not just an organizational matter, but also we need to improve the manpower, the talent, which supports this system. This is something that we have come to learn through our commission. And again, from this perspective, we would like to put together our ideas and put together a series of recommendations. The fifth point is in regards to the operator. The operators also need to, on their own, realize that they are handling nuclear energy, and they were lacking this awareness that they were responsible and needed to create such a safety culture. And there needs to be, on the one hand, the regulatory framework to enable the operators to become more aware of this. And this is another thing that we would like to realize at our commission. As I said at the outset, we have been carrying out a lot of surveys, investigations, and ultimately we will be putting together a final report. And through these discussions on the points that I've just raised, well, we want to try to reflect this in our final report. And during this process, we see that this is not relevant for us, and we might make some changes for the time being. These are the 5 points that we would like to share amongst the members of our commission in carrying out our work. And I'd like to receive the consent, confirm to see if I can receive the consent of the commission members. And if so, then we will disclose our findings through our homepage in stages. Thank you, Mr. Nomura. To the members of the commission, as Mr. Nomura has explained, will you agree to compiling the final report in the way that has been just explained? Since I see that there is no objection, we will do so. Well, as for what we have summarized today, is to present the issues that we feel at this point in time need to be addressed by this commission. But we will continue to work hard towards the final report. And our findings will be posted on our home page. And if you should have any comments to make, please feel to do so through our website. And what we have just disclosed here is only part of what we are discussing. And though time is limited until we are to put together our final report, we hope to be able to address other issues as well, which will be disclosed to the public when necessary. And once again, I'd like to thank not only the commission members, but also the reporters and also the observers for your participation. The next commission meeting will be held on May 27th, a Sunday. The then Chief Cabinet Secretary, current Minister of Economy, Trade and Industry, Mr. Yukio Edano, will be questioning mainly about what had happened at the time of the accident and after. Thank you for your participation. I declare the meeting adjourned.
メディアの方へ記者会見の
To the media, I would like to make an announcement. The press conference will be held in 30 minutes' time from 20 past 6. 6:20 is the starting time for the press conference. Thank you.